Well, it just seems as if they are not ready for me at this point in time, as they are no doubt getting themselves sorted out in studio. But I'm
Ruskin, we're
seeing
here
Dr.
with you,
Fergus. I'm
brother.
also seeing Shabaka in there. So let me try this once again and say a very good evening to the distinguished gentleman, Dr. Fergus, Shabaka Kambon, and of course,
Good
Roots
evening, Oscar, and good
Morning.
evening to the listeners of Talk City 91.1 FM. And a pleasant welcome to our viewers and listeners on social media, Facebook, and YouTube. Good evening to my colleagues.
Indeed. Good evening, Dr. Fergus. And of course, we have another very interesting program for you this evening. We talk again about the issue of crime. And but before we get into that, where do we start, Renee?
Okay, so good night to our listeners. Good night to Dr. Fergus and yourself, Shabaka. I'm happy to be here with you all again. So the first thing we want to do at the top of the program is really do our report from the Secretariat. As people would know, we would have launched our festival, our Pan-African Festival TT, commemorating emancipation. And since then, we've had our annual fashion show, Iwa Africa, Conscious Threads. And I must say it was a hit. We had a really amazing turnout. And I think what I love about Iwa Africa is there is a really nice balance between the clothes that is showcased and the performances from the artists. We really have, I think, unlocked a formula, so to say, when it comes to unique fashion shows.
Indeed.
But up next are two events that are very close to my heart. The first is Saturday, the 14th of June at 2 p.m. It is our Yoruba Village Drum Festival, where we bring our drumming and dancing groups across Trinidad and Tobago into the Yoruba Village Square. And we pay homage to our ancestors. We raise vibes, as some of the drummers might say. And it's also an opportunity for a lot of mentorship to happen in this sacred space. We also use the Yoruba Village Drum Festival as an opportunity to acknowledge the accomplishments, and contributions from people within the community. So every year, we identify someone for the Keep of the Tradition Award, and this is someone who has been contributing to their community. And with the Keep of the Tradition Award, previously we just used to identify someone from the Yoruba Village community, that's East Port of Spain, Laventille, Mova. 2 years ago, we made a decision to expand it outside of your typical Yoruba village, because we understand that there are elders who are doing amazing work throughout Trinidad and Tobago. But this year we brought it back to Yoruba Village, and I'm really happy and honored to let people know that we are honoring Iya Yoka Curtin. She is a stalwart in Success Village. When I tell you this is an amazing woman, when I tell you that this person knows how to collaborate, she knows how to coordinate, she knows how to organize, and as Kwame Ture would say, mobilize, mobilize, mobilize. One of the things that has really stood out to me about Iya Yoka Curtin has been her ability to collaborate with other Pan-African groups in the community. So she has done a lot of work with the Kwame Ture Education Center. As people may know, is run by David and Roxanne Mohammed. And she also does a lot of work with the Success Laventille Networking Committee, which is chaired by Oba Kantime, a past awardee of this Keep Up the Tradition Award as well. And like I said, she has done a lot of work to ensure that the Ifa Orisha tradition is both preserved and passed on to the upcoming generations. And we want to acknowledge that and celebrate that, and just say, we see you, we see the work you're putting in, and we applaud you for it. One of the other awards that we give out at that particular event is an award in recognition of the UN Day for the African Child. And this year we're awarding two students, a boy and a girl, from Success Laventille Secondary School. Both Kayla and Jeremiah are outstanding students. They have set themselves apart academically, but they're also both known for their artistic skills. They're both artists. Their teacher, Nelshan, forgive me because I can't remember his last name. I'm also on a very first name basis with it, but Nelshan speaks very highly of them. And we just wanted to, again, acknowledge the amazing work that people in the community are doing. People tend to write off what we know as Yoruba Village. We want to continue to classify it as a hotspot and speak of it and think of it in the terms of nothing good comes out of there when that is so far from the truth. So we want to invite persons to come out to the Yoruba Village Drum Festival. Like I said, it's Saturday, the 14th of June. It starts at 2 p.m. It's Yoruba Village Square, opposite the Besson Street Station, police station. And you have no excuses now. You can't say you don't know where the square is because it have a big, lovely, amazing monument right there. That's your landmark, and you just make your way down to the square. There'll be things on sale. You can look forward to different drumming groups from Diego Martin, Sandy Grandi, Saparia. It really is a nice event to attend. So we want to welcome everyone on Saturday and to come and have fun with us. Yeah. So following, sorry, go ahead.
Renee, go ahead. I mean, I was just thinking of David Rudder's poetry when he said, out of a muddy pond, 10,000 flowers bloom. And I think somehow that is not just a metaphor for the reality in some of our communities, but for all of us in terms of our history as well.
Yes, yes.
And I think you have something else to share with us, Rennie.
Yes. So just before, it's just one more thing. I think it's important to note that we have been awarding the Keep Up the Tradition Award and the award in commemoration of the UN Day for the African Child since 2011. So there's no shortage of excellent persons, successful persons, determined persons coming out of those communities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So not to stay too long, we're going over to the launch of the Kwame Ture Memorial Lecture Series, which is now Sunday, the 15th of June. Starts at 5 p.m. and it's being held at Napa Theatre 1. We will be featuring Professor Lewis, and he's going to be speaking about the, I think, what is critical foundational work to Pan-Africanism, those works produced by Frantz Fanon. So we want to encourage people to come out. We're going to talk about why Frantz Fanon's work is still relevant to us in the modern Caribbean, especially as we continue to pursue reparations and decolonization. So I want to encourage everyone to please come out, attend the event in person, and just there's supposed to be a live Q&A session following. So it's a nice time just to share ideas, learn new things, and engage in healthy discussions.
Yes. Now let me say this. Professor Gordon or Lewis Gordon has been he has been generating a lot of excitement in the academic community. You know, we know that a lot of people, since we announced that he would launch the Kwame Ture Memorial Lecture Series, there's a lot of people who are, calling to find out when it's happening, how they could get tickets, where the event is, and so on. And of course, it's at Theatre 1 in Napa, starting at 5 p.m. on Sunday. And I advise anybody who's really interested to bring your family. And of course, Sunday is also Father's Day, if I'm not mistaken. And so perhaps we should throw a challenge out now to the fathers to bring their children, particularly their sons, for a dose of consciousness. One of the most interesting, intellectuals to come out of the Caribbean in the 20th century, one of the most significant luminaries is Frantz Fanon.
Yes.
Everywhere in the world, over the last few decades, that you've had people standing up against power, speaking truth to power. whether it's in North Africa, in Asia, in Europe and North America, in in the Caribbean, across the Americas. You have in New Zealand, in Greenland, his name comes into the conversation.
Yes, I was just reflecting on how his work is relevant to all people of color.
Yes, indeed. And so, we're really excited to have someone who is a scholar of Fanon's work to come and share with us. Some of the over the years on Indaba, some of the most exciting programs we've had are those where we decide to engage in discussions about the works of Fanon. I can distinctly remember one day we did a special on the Wretched of the Earth. And, the amount of people who called in, from their living rooms with their texts to discuss, their favorite chapter or quote or what have you. It's quite extraordinary. And so this particular lecture promises to be something quite interesting, or something that you would not want to miss. And it's a lovely venue, Napa. And so, you definitely want to, Renee, give everybody the numbers at the office that they can call so they can make sure to be there. And let us know how people going to get in. How does it work?
Right. So, because ESC is very much about making education accessible to everyone, the event is completely free of charge. Like you said, it's taking place at Napa Theatre One, a really nice, comfortable venue to take in a discussion and a conversation like this. And if you want further information, I want to encourage everybody to visit our Facebook page, is Emancipation Support Committee TTESC, to get more information. Our Facebook page is a page to visit for current up-to-date information about all our events during this festival. But if you're not, into social media, please call us at 235-5008, 235-5008, and we'll be able to answer all your questions, whether it's lecture related or festival related.
Right. And I just want to say one more thing. We have not abandoned our mission to rename Oxford Street Kwame Ture Street after the great man. So on the eve of this important lecture series, this annual lecture series, we want to remind the public that, whether it's the PNM or the UNC, we're going to keep the fire burning under these politicians to celebrate one of our national heroes who has made a great contribution across the globe and is recognized in many other parts of the world.
Yes. So before we go on to the next segment, I just want to leave people with some, videos, some teasers about the two upcoming events. And then once I'm done, I'll bring you all straight back for our Africa report.
Europe is literally the creation of the third world. The riches that choke her are that which was stolen from the underdeveloped peoples. The ports of Holland, the docks of Bordeaux and Liverpool specialize in the slave trade and owe their renown from millions of deported slaves. So when we hear a European head of state declare with hand on his heart that he must help poor underdeveloped peoples, we do not tremble with gratitude. Rather, we say, quote, it's just reparations owed to us.
Yes, Renee, bring up the Africa report one time. It's on the Sahelian revolution, the demonstration, solidarity, marches for Ibrahim Traore and the revolution. Bring it up one time. We are running out of time badly this evening. I call it Solidarity 2.0.
Million people in Mali went on the streets to defend one man, Assimi Goïta, and they are asking the Malians to go back to a ballot box. And when democracy, they have made us to believe that democracy is looking for the majority. 15 million people out of a population of 18 million are on the street.
That was the scene on the streets of Accra on African Liberation Day, 25th of May 2025, and the questioning of the value of Western-dictated democracy in Africa. This is the Africa Report. As promised on the 30th of April, Global Africa regrouped on the 25th of May to send louder, more strident messages to America and its NATO allies. Hands off Ibrahim Traore.
What we experienced in the 1987 assassination will not be repeated. What happened to Captain Sankara will not happen to Captain Traore. We will go all the way to defend our president.
That was a patriot in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. Conscious Africans around the world, including major Caribbean cities, also showed their support for Traore. But this week's Africa Report focuses exclusively on the motherland. The two major theaters of activities were Accra in Ghana and the several cities in Burkina Faso. Ghana, of course, had the most Pan-African gathering. Citizens from different countries came out with their country's flags held high, while some symbolically dragged the American and French flags behind them. For those who may have missed the boat, Global Africa declared media war backed by massive street demonstrations around the world in defense of the revolution in the AES, the Association of Sahelian States, but especially in solidarity with Burkina Faso's iconic leader, Ibrahim Traore, immediately after General Michael Langley brazenly lied to the U.S. Congress that Traore was using his country's gold to maintain himself in power. Langley is the head of Africa's military consortium called AFRICOM, or Africa Command. Let us take in some of the sights and sentiments of the Accra demonstrations. Unfortunately, I did not get the names of the speakers, but here they are. If I have to describe the first speaker, I would say she reminds me of the spirit that moved Ya Asantewa, who took command of the Ashanti army against the British, and Winnie Mandela, who led the war against the Afrikaners in the final stages of apartheid.
Today, on African Liberation Day, in the spirit of Pan-Africanism, we are standing with the people of Burkina Faso, led by Captain Ibrahim Traore. The reason we are standing is because for decades, for centuries, Africa has been subjugated to oppression by the West, by any imperialist force that feels that it is their right to take what is ours. And we are saying no more. We are standing with Traore, who has stood and consistently shown that it is possible, like his predecessor Sankara, to stand and show what it means to be an upright person and show what it means to claim an Africa for Africans. And so what we are doing here today, you have people from Sudan, you have people from Nigeria, you have people from Uganda, from all over the continent, and it is happening across the continent as well. We are saying that no more interference from the West, no more breaking down of the systems that are meant to serve Africans, no more stealing of our resources, no more breaking of systems that operate in our favor, no more killing of the leaders who have been put in place to make sure that we as a continent can grow. We are saying that Africa will be free, and it will be free now. No more from the West.
The second speaker invokes the spirit of legendary Bob Marley.
And we cannot be sitting idle and watch on as the West attack a brother who is actually fighting for the liberation of his people. And historically, we've seen several instances where leaders who stand up to fight for the interests of their people are either overthrown or assassinated by the West. And in the words of the famous Bob Marley, he says, "How long shall we sit and watch as they kill our prophets?"
The next speaker hit the nail on the head, respecting the imperative of youth solidarity. I had to bleep out a bit for Talk City listeners.
Ibrahim Traore has taken after Thomas Sankara. It is not far-fetched. He has taken after Thomas Sankara as a revolutionary leader and as a soldier against the Western imperialists. Because if he's not standing and fighting against the policies of the Western imperialists, the exploitation of the Western imperialists, they will not be fighting against him. You understand? Look at Nigeria. Are they fighting against Tinubu? They cannot fight against Tinubu. Look at Ramaphosa recently going to USA to kiss the hand of Donald Trump, being a boy to him. This is why we are standing in solidarity with him, because if we are not with him, he will just turn to another Thomas Sankara. As the saying goes, Ibrahim Traore is us and we are Ibrahim Traore. So we always stand in solidarity with him because he's a man that is born to liberate his people and possibly Africa.
The final speaker understands that the commitment to revolution transcends demonstrations, the Malcolm X factor, by any means necessary.
He is the one we've been waiting for. We didn't even know. I knew I was waiting, but he's a Messiah. He came from nowhere. And we are awake, we are ready to follow him. Listen, we will do anything to support Ibrahim Traore and any other African leader work for Africa. We're here today to show him that if we need to go to Burkina Faso to join the army, we are ready. We are ready for him. We've been waiting for him.
The rest of the Africa report addresses the reaction to Traore Solidarity 2.0. The centerpiece of this segment is the Conference of Military Chiefs from 37 African countries, convened by General Langley's Africa Command in Nairobi, the capital of Kenya, which opened on the 26th of May. According to a communique from AFRICOM, quote, "The meeting comes at a time when many African countries are facing political and economic instability and a humanitarian crisis, which are likely to pose security threats to U.S. interests in Africa and create space for expanded engagement by U.S. competitors." End quote. The dominance of America at the conference was obvious in that only American military organizations were specifically identified in public media. The first time that Africa Command held its annual conference in Africa was in 2024 in Gaborone, Botswana. That meeting took place in June. So one wonders about the timing this year. One day after the Global African Solidarity demonstrations, I think it was strategic, not coincidence. Remember the catchphrase, "weapons of mass destruction," that were used to justify dismantling the Iraqi state under Saddam Hussein? I was fascinated with Langley's emphasis on the catchwords shared values and core values in multiple situations to justify dismantling the independence project in the Sahel.
Congressman, core values is what we start off with in IMA programs. Core values. I will repeat that. We have that shared goal of defeating terrorism. We have shared objectives. Various African countries that have shared objectives, shared values in our approach to the threats, but also to explore the opportunities.
This is the oldest imperialist dictum, that the interest of the imperialist must be the interest of the subjugated. This is much more than soft power rhetoric. In 2024, only Mali was invited to the AFRICOM conference in Botswana, but this year all 3 countries of the AES were invited. None took the bait, signaling a strategic stance on self-reliance in military affairs, just as in every other aspect of the revolution. The timing of the Nairobi conference was intended to both appease the AES after General Langley's faux pas at the U.S. congressional hearing and to demonstrate America's military might. The appeasement was brought out in an interview by a courageous young journalist during the conference.
And we offer to work together with the Burkinabe government and border countries.
This is a stepping away from his initial threat in the U.S. Congress. The interviewer grilled him on the real purpose of America's military presence in Africa.
The reaction out of the statements that you made about Burkina Faso were several African leaders feeling you are speaking on sovereignty issues that America shouldn't be. And as a result, there are those who see the role of Africa as less of a partner in, the war against, shared threats, as you mentioned, and more of a protector of Western or American economic interests that allows access to Africa's vast mineral resources, and as more of a paternalistic relationship than one of respect amongst peers. What would you respond to that?
Langley's jingoistic response was laughable.
I respond that there's others on the globe that do that. There's others on the globe that do that.
Others do that. So America is the darling imperialist. Is that what he's saying? Langley emerged from that interview with his false narrative of Burkina Faso as the epicenter of global terrorism intact, but not for long. In a global press debriefing after the conference, a journalist from Cameroon, Ngala Chimtom, exposed the lie and erased the smirk from Langley's face with hard facts.
General Langley, in early April, before the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee, you questioned Burkina Faso's governance, asserting that its mining resources were being used to sustain the current regime. However, recent developments suggest a different picture. Reports indicate that Burkina Faso now earns $1,200 per ounce of gold, significantly up from $300 under French oversight. Traditionally, President Traoré has allocated over $179 million in gold proceeds to provide farming equipment aiming to accelerate agricultural production. Given these facts, does this shift in resource allocation alter your previous assessment that raw material revenues primarily serve to keep Traoré in power?
The interview was available only in audio format, but Langley was obviously dumbfounded.
Given these reports, I'm glad to hear that there's a shift in resource allocation that benefits civil society, because the enduring solution to counterterrorism does start with protecting civil society writ large. So from a military perspective, which were my comments were directed towards, concerns remain on military resourcing management of what external military support is received for the whole fight of terrorism across their sovereign nation.
On the day that the Langley conference began, the AES also began to conduct joint military exercises in northern Niger. Like Africa, this was no coincidence. These exercises sent a clear and dramatic message to America, affirming that the AES can manage its own military affairs. Interestingly, Togo and Chad participated in the military exercises in Niger, making it 5 states that have dared the imperialist objective to compromise their sovereignty. This must have been a troubling scenario to General Langley.
Troops from several member states of the Sahel States Alliance, AES, have begun a joint military exercise in northwestern Niger as part of a 2-week regional training to combat terrorism. According to Deputy Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces, Abdul Amiru, the initiative is both strategic and humanitarian, aimed at showcasing shared commitment to strengthening armed forces, fostering strong partnerships and unity across cross-border threats, including terrorism. He adds that the second edition of the Taha Nakal military exercise, also known as the Love of the Fatherland in Tamesh language, brought together troops from AES members Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, as well as forces from Chad and Togo. Officials explained that the exercises are designed not only to fight terrorist groups, but also to address broader security issues.
That was Channels TV News. We conclude this week's Africa Report with 2 of our most treasured ideals that were gravely damaged by the European partitioning of Africa. These are African unity and African dignity as a people.
We do not need the veto power. We need unity. The dying problem of Africa right now is our unity.
For many Africans, this is not just about terrorism or resources. It's about dignity, sovereignty, and the long shadow of foreign influence on the continent.
All right.
Yes, my brother Shabaka, I would leave the comment to you. I ended up in the spirit. I ended in the spirit of the Yoruba Jam Festival with Yoruba Cultural Peace Day. That's the Ichibu Festival, which took place recently. You know, it's a grand event in the Ichibu state. So, yeah, you can give your feedback quickly because we'll have to dive into the next segment.
Well, no, my feedback is going to come in the form of a couple questions for you here on this particular Africa report. I mean, you participated in events on May 25th, African Liberation Day or Africa Day on the continent. Were you surprised at all by the extent, the strength of Pan-African sentiment around the world that this particular issue has seemed to bring to the fore?
I think that question is not quite necessary, Shabaka. Obviously, I'm not surprised. Besides, there was a build-up. I remember it wasn't something spontaneous. And if we judge from the more spontaneous event of the 30th, it was also massive, and they had almost a month, you know, to prepare for the next event. So I'm not surprised at all. What I'm surprised about is that it was low-keyed in some countries. I don't want to name those countries in Africa, but it was low-keyed in some countries. And that is what surprises me. But the global outpouring of sentiments, because, you know, as the lady said, the speaker, you know, many see him as a messiah, a political messiah, you know, and a lot of people's hopes and dreams of a new Africa, really, not just in the revolution, but in Traore himself, you know, as the center of the revolution.
Yeah. Now, what I also find interesting, and perhaps you let me know if this or if you also are not surprised by this, but in terms of the discourse that is coming out of these events, there's a strong emphasis on anti-imperialism. That's something that would have been, you know, very important in Pan-Africanist discourse in the 60s and 70s. There was this clear articulation of a condemnation, I would say, of the complicity of the West in the challenges that Africa faces today, particularly in terms of sovereignty, in terms of economics, and you know, and that strong desire to protect those leaders that want to challenge that that reality. Any of those sentiments?
Yeah, well, not there, between the 60s and now, Shabaka, that consciousness has deepened and it has widened. You see, it's beyond certain centers that were into the civil rights movement in the 1960s and 70s. This is truly a global African phenomenon. The disappointment is that too many African leaders, and I suppose we can say that about the Caribbean too, but I wouldn't want to say that, but too many African leaders are still in the embrace of the imperialists. And it reflected in the large number of them who chose to go to that Nairobi conference. The more conscious leaders, those who were really truly anti-colonial and perhaps even anti-American, stayed away. So that was a statement in itself. 37, more than last year, attended the conference.
And Doc, were you aware that General Langley, at least 6 days ago, he was either fired, replaced, or resigned?
I heard that. I can't confirm, so I wouldn't say something like that on air. I heard about it. These things, I heard a lot of things about a lot of these countries, a lot of overthrows and so on, but I can't confirm, and therefore I don't come to the media with it, to the radio.
Indeed, of course. Well, certainly there's a possibility that the negative reaction globally to his comments may have been a factor or might be impacting his future trajectory. All right, Doctor. Well, I think we could leave it there. Very interesting Africa report, and it has told us a lot about the possibilities of the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
All right, now welcome as we welcome our guests as they come into the studio digitally. Let me remind our listeners that on Sunday, the gates at Napa will open at 4. You want to get into the auditorium by 4:30 because at that time, the Emancipation Support Committee will show 2 brief shorts, one on the life of Kwame Ture and one on Frantz Fanon. So this will take place prior to the lecture at 5. So we're inviting people from across the country who are coming to this event, the grand opening of the Kwame Ture Memorial Lecture Series, to come early, to come by 4:20, to be seated by 4:30, so they could benefit from the short films that will precede the lecture. Welcome, Danielle. Welcome, Mitima. Welcome to Indaba.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for having us.
Greetings.
All right. So let's start. Let's put this conversation right into its appropriate context, its contemporary context, before we get into solutions and so on. Of course, we want to have a balanced discussion in terms of critiques and in terms of allowing ourselves to discuss the potential approaches that we have developed, that we're aware of, that could solve the issue. But we are in an environment right now where powerful forces in the country, the highest level, are exploring the El Salvador option. Citizens are being encouraged to arm themselves and hanging. There are attempts to resume hangings, and of course the criminalization of students for fighting at schools. All of these policy positions seem to be based on punitive approaches to crime and violence prevention. And perhaps we could say that they are even a stark departure from the public health approach that CARICOM leaders would have signed on to just 2 years ago. Danielle, perhaps you could start. We'd start with you.
Okay, so I note, like the rest of Trinidad and Tobago, our troubling approach to a return to a more aggressive approach to crime. But I think it's a reflection of a heightened uncertainty that we're experiencing in our community. And we are grappling for very quick fixes to a long-term problem that we're not willing to invest in amply. We're not willing to take the time with amply. And my hope is that all of the things that are put on the table are just the initial salvo, and that our current administration is willing to come to the table with different community and groups that have been dealing with these things on a more organic level to have a wider conversation about solutions.
Right. Mitima, brother, Sister Danielle is hoping that what we are hearing about here are sort of the knee-jerk initial reactions of the current administration, and that perhaps once they have an opportunity to give things more thought, we're going to start to hear something more, a more collaborative approach will emerge. What say you, brother?
Yes, good evening everyone again. So I I too also agree. Now, you all will be familiar with the Citizen Security Program, right? It was out of the Ministry of National Security, and they had also adopted that public health approach to crime. Now, when the Kamala administration came into power, the first time, what the Prime Minister had done, she had expanded CSP across 20, no, interestingly, 22 communities in East Port of Spain alone. And that was because we had the problem of the Rasta city, Muslim city conflict. And as a result of that, you had Nelson Street split into upper and lower. Same thing with Duncan. You had George. You had splits within Quarry Street. So she had expanded CSP into, they got 22 communities inside of there, right? And that worked until the former administration came in, and then, well, CSP has been scratched, right? So I'm hoping that she looks back at that model, right? Bring back that CSP model, that Citizen Security Program, which had the Project Reason, right? There was a project called Project Reason, which used the public health approach. They had used the from the Cure Violence out of Chicago, and that worked in the East Palestine area. The report is there in IDB, right? It's online. People could go and check it. That program had worked when it was established. It is no more. So I'm hoping that they could revisit that. I'm also hoping that they could meet with stakeholders who also doing the work on the ground, like yourselves, like our groups. There are many other NPOs that actually do a lot of work, not just in the school, but in the communities. And let's come together with a collaborative approach. What you find happening, Dr. Fergus and Shabaka and my colleague Danielle, we work in silos. So Roots Fund, and we work with grants. So we get a grant to run a 6 months program, a 9 months program, right? And at the end of that program, that's it. Because the life of the program is the life of the grant, the award of the grant. If we could get that state support to have a sustained program, because we cannot want to solve school violence in 6 weeks, 6 months, 9 months, right? We have to have a sustained program working with these children along the way. So that's what I would say for now, and let the discussion kind of develop some more.
Yeah, Brother Mitima, I mean, you raise a very interesting question there. It seems that perhaps the last regime has to take some responsibility for the current heightened, reality, the current statistics around crime and violence because of its own hardline approach, which undermined what was there before. I don't know, Danielle, you have your ear close to the ground. How do you feel about this particular, this assertion?
I think that would be a very narrow view of looking at where this problem came from. I think whether you deal with the previous UNC administration, the previous PNM administration, there were programs that were good in both, and there were programs that were problematic. The framework of the solutions are there. It's even incorporated into the social services, into police, youth clubs. The frameworks are there. However, what all of the frameworks are missing is what Brother Mitima was talking about, is support. We can't have a children's authority with children's home that take children out of problematic homes and environment and then put them in a home and underfund the homes. and have the phone homes having to look for private funding in order to ensure that staff and food and those things are available. We can't have programs that start for 6 months and end when in truth and in fact within the fabric of both national security and the social development programs, there are already pre-existing programs that already address some of these issues. What we need to do is coordinate the support and the services and probably be a little more creative and out of the box in our thinking and bring in the community groups into social development and these types of institutions and see how it is we could operationalize the things that work and tweak and get rid of the things that don't work. And then we also have to look at the restructuring of our environment. There are minimal or reduced public spaces for families and children to go out and safely engage, safely exercise. Our public spaces are being eaten up constantly by commercial ventures, and we have to find a balance for that. We have shagaramas. When I was a child, we used to get on the bus. We live Barataria, and we would get on the bus in Port of Spain and go down to shagaramas, bathe, and enjoy the seafront. And it was easy access for those of us who did not have private transportation. Now, those accesses are being eroded, they're being monetized, and more families have to depend on non-public transport in order to get to some of these places. So we have to look and be a little more creative and go a little wider in our solutions, because the frameworks are there. What is absent is a consistent funding or even will to some extent to support the things that work and work well.
Yeah, Brother Mitima, Sister
Yes.
Danielle is suggesting that there are blueprints that already exist that need to be supported, analyzed, and supported, based on their track record. That seems to correspond with what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, no, I know you're speaking about, looking at us, the school violence and stuff like that, but that program, that citizen security program, right, where when I started to work with CSP back in 2015, right, I looked at CSP as behind the scenes. So let me explain that. I attended Serval and I worked at Serval, right? So let's say Serval is the movie, and then behind the scenes of the movie, that was CSP, because we were actually in the homes, we were in the communities, we were where those children came from. And the thing about that citizen security program, it allowed the residents to shape how they want their community to be. A big problem we have, especially with school violence. We want to address school violence, but the four of us as adults discussing what's best for the children, what's best for the school. And we're not involving the children in that discussion, because, as you know, we have our PhD and MSc, and we're bright. So we don't need to hear from them. Let me just share, if I can, a very successful program we had run in 4 schools, right? And the program is called Aim High. We like acronyms, right? So it's amazing, intelligent, motivated. Aim. Healing inwardly, growing happily, high. And it was about reducing school violence. And we asked the children, because we are not fighting in school, you are fighting in school, how to reduce school violence. Some of the children said, they jump up one time, well, Miss don't come to class. We say, why Miss doesn't come to class? Because of us. I say, well then, how are you fixing that? You saying Miss not coming to class because of you. How are you fixing that? And in a nutshell, the children came up with this solution. They say, sir, Miss and them have problems. We have problems too. These are words the children said. Let us do a program addressing trauma. We brought in a professional counseling psychologist. He did 2 sessions with the students. We did 4 sessions with the teachers. And then the last 2 sessions, we combined the students and the teachers. And audience, my colleagues here on this call, people started to cry. Children cry. Hello, it was interesting. It was amazing. Because why? The children were right. All of us had problems. And the school now became a battleground, not between students and students, but between teachers and students, not physically fighting, but missing come in the class because all they get in trouble, you know, this and that. And that, those 4, 2 and 2, 8 sessions, it didn't solve the entire problem, but it brought to the fore that miss and them, and I'm using miss and them because the children said miss and them. Who do you all think the them were? The children said miss and them. Who's the them? Any one of you all?
The them?
Yeah.
The other administrators, the other people in authority, perhaps?
Miss and them, the them was sirs. The only time the students will call Dr. Fergus by his name is if he impacted their life positively. All the other male teachers, they refer to them as them. And that, to me, speaks volume as to the absence of males in those children's lives, that they dismiss that male authority as them. But like them. But it's miss and them.
So, Mitima, what comes across very clearly is that in your experience, the issue is much more profound than we would first imagine. There's something deeper here at issue. This is not, we can't import a solution from abroad or from somewhere else. We have something taking place here within our society, something. We have issues here that have roots here that need to be explored and understood if we are to move forward. Is that what you're getting?
Yeah, no. Look, no, the public health approach, that cure violence model, right? That's out of Chicago. But guess what? We adapted that to our climate.
Yeah, I'm saying that when you went in, what you just told me there, when you went into those schools and you had those discussions, it seems to me that what your results indicate that there's something deeper going on that is not just among students, not just among teachers, but the whole interplay of teachers, students, the education system, the communities. It seems to me that you have uncovered something much deeper than one would first imagine.
Yeah, and yes, and listen, that's just one of the schools. The other school, the children said to us, "Sir, we need to see how we behaving." I said, "What do you mean?" "Sir, if we get to see how we just behave, you check yourselves." We brought in a professional drama team to do playback theater, right? And the children came up with these scenarios, and some of the scenarios included mommy coming in school to fight. And the team now demonstrated that, paused and told the children, okay, how we could fix this scenario. And the children gave suggestions. Well,
yeah, let's get into concrete, Mitima, because you've raised the issue there. The last major incident of violence, which precipitated this conversation nationally, what was his name? It was Ian Allen interviewed the mother of the child who was seriously injured in the incident. And 2 things came out. One is that she had spent 2 years, talking to the authorities at the school about the problem before the incident took place, which raises the question of the authorities there and their complicity in the final outcome. And 2 was that she identified that the parents themselves different members of the community were having issues which were mirrored in the behavior of the children, so that the issues that manifested themselves among the children had their genesis in arguments and fights that were taking place among parents.
Yes, and on that's the one with the sisters, or I don't say half sisters.
This is the incident where the young lady was
in the toilet,
to the extent where she had to have surgery. It was on video,
right.
It was on TV.
So the stepfather said that, and that started out of the school, online, a home situation came into the school. Yes, so listen, it is never a one issue. It's multi-pronged. There's never, and we cannot take a one side of, as Danielle was saying, approach to whether there's violence at school or violence at home.
But you see,
all the factors.
That's the thing, though. It's easy. I think it's very easy. And I think there's a bit of laziness on our part to hyper focus on the children. Our children are a reflection of us. And there is violence in our society across the board. There's violence in places of employment. Workplace bullying is on a record high. There's violence in the schools in terms of tertiary education. There's violence across the board, and our children are just a little reflection back at us of what it is we are putting into this space, and they're absorbing it, and we are expecting them to respond better to the stimulus of violence than we respond ourselves. From the way we speak to each other on social media, I think the last election cycle, the discourse on social media was extremely instructive in how easily it was for us to be nasty and mean and deprecating to each other, to absolute strangers. Now you take that into the homes. Do we think that these deprecating, abusive words and conduct is limited to social media? It's happening in the homes. And then when it is we demand, or just taking an old adage, when the boss pressure the husband, and the husband now has to get an outlet, he's pressuring the wife. When the wife has to get an outlet, now she is pressuring the children, and the child only outlet is the animals. So it's a trickle down situation, and we are so hyper focused on
Dr. Fergus here. Doc, is there a historical explanation for this? Is there a historical way to?
Of course, Shabaka, of course. Our history is one of violence. We have never dealt with that aspect of our history, and what we are seeing is a continuation of that. So I agree with Mitima that the problem is systemic, it's structural, it's also historical, and therefore stopgap measures cannot resolve the problem. We must really aim for sustained and institutional strategies. But I want to ask a specific question, gendered question. Mitima touched on it in terms of the mother he mentioned, in terms of the girls. Now, physical violence is generally associated with males for various reasons. Might be hormonal, might be cultural, might be historical. So crimes of or crimes with a deadly or brutal force, physical violence, is really a progression of youth violence. That's how I see it, besides the historical phenomenon. But most of the school fighters that feature on social media are girls. And so I'm wondering if we are missing something, if it is that girls are more frequently highlighted and not that they are more frequently engaged in fighting. But definitely, if we judge from social media, from years gone back, it's not just recent. To me, it's almost always girls that are featured in these fights. Perhaps Danielle could shed some light on that. Why girls? Are we missing something? Is it the home again that we are coming back to? Is it the general violence in society? But why girls? Why girls? Could Danielle have shed some light on that?
Dr. Fergus, you are asking me to opine on something that I would rather not from a gender perspective. But I think what we could look at is the fact that women tend to be some of the larger receivers or recipients of violence, whether it be mental, physical, emotional violence. Women tend to be that recipient. I think what happened is the girls tend to be, at least this is my presumption, on social media just a little bit more, and they tend to be a little bit more tech savvy, especially in terms of the manipulation and the maneuvering of social media, that their activities tend to be highlighted. And then I think it is a shock to the society, a very patriarchal society, that assumes that this level of physical violence is not natural to girls. But it could be that it wasn't identified, highlighted, or even really talked about seriously prior to now, like it is now, because we have visual evidence in our neighborhood, in a social economically depressed area. Women always was cussing by the standpipe, getting into fisticuff over sometimes domestic, sometimes partner violence, and it was always dismissed as, you know, them women and them and how they are and they're emotional and that type of thing. But now, as we have more language, we have more proof of the violent capacity that women also possess, and we see them acting out in these areas. I think it's really more of a shock to our patriarchal sensibilities than it is that girls are now hyper violent versus what they were before. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah, that's a little insert there. There's a historical dimension to that as well. During the days of slavery, the people who were most feared by the drivers were not the men, you know, it was a woman. And that is widely reported that the drivers were more likely to be cornered and beaten by women. So this fighting spirit had been there for quite a long time. It's not something recent. And we shouldn't be afraid to speak to the truth. Whether, I mean, it might be uncomfortable. I'm not blaming one gender or the other, just observing a phenomenon and trying to get some explanation for it.
Yeah, and one of the schools we worked in.
And Tima, wait, before you continue, let me just
yeah.
Let me just first get, do you agree or acknowledge the observation that Dr. Fergus has made, which Danielle already has endorsed, that perhaps there is a overrepresentation of women in the violence?
Well,
girls, sorry.
No, one of the schools we worked in Tristan, a school of, I think about 800 or 900 students, and the majority of the fights, if not almost all, were from the girls. Even the fellas and all was saying, the boys and them were saying, sir, them girls real bad here, you know, and a lot of the fights that to the no. Long ago,
this brings up a further question.
No, just
sorry, brother.
This is interesting to you all because my wife is a school teacher, and I told my wife about this. So a girl came to us one of the sessions. She was fighting. She said she and a group of girls fought. Now, again, in my mind, when we know girls fighting is all for boys. So she started to explain to me, sir, let me explain to you. It's a girl I like. And then it's like, and yes, I was a bit shocked. I don't think I showed it on my face. But she was looking for a response. She said, so what happened? Why are you looking so? I said, no, I'm paying attention. I want to hear what you're saying. And I tried my best to keep a very straight face. And when she explained to me how this whole fight erupted, I went to her and I told my wife, I said, listen, we have to look at these fights with a different lens now. Because you might pull in the 2 girls for fighting and you might start off, you know, books and boys don't mix. And nothing to do with boys. You know, it had to do with their emotions, their feelings for somebody else who is not a boy. And I brought up that because we have to look, addressing these things is not straightforward, right? Because, again, all of us will think that books and boys don't mix. No, it's books and boys or books and girls, right? Because that particular girl said the big fight in the school was over girls, right? So we may pull them in the office, reprimand them, and never address the issue because we feel it's Shabaka they're fighting over. When is Danielle?
Sounds to me like something of a quaint issue that you're raising there. But let's stay within the genre for a minute and let's ask some more questions. Is there a predominance of violence? We've already established, at least from yourself, from the observation of Dr. Fergus, from Danielle's observation, from your experience in the schools, that there seems to be a preponderance of girls involved in the fighting. Is there also a preponderance of African girls in particular? And, perhaps, and if that is so, what might it say about our community? Because, I would imagine that some other communities would find this conversation a bit strange. Let me start with you, Danielle.
Well, we had to look at this from two perspectives. It could be that there is a overwhelming amount of this behavior in our community, but there is as Dr. Fergus said, there's a historical context to that. And we can't ignore the fact that our community still faces a certain amount of discrimination and systemic racism and ignorances that it comes with its own amount of violence. So we are responding to the stimuli that is placed upon us that may not be placed upon another group. So there is that perspective. But then there's another perspective of us being over-policed. So it could be that in some areas that it may be happening in other communities and it is being dealt with in a different way. It's not being tolerated, but it is being approached more tenderly, more systemically, going at it from a more social awareness aspect of it and dealing with the family and the whole and that type of thing. Whereas when it comes to us, even when it is the teachers and the people around us, it is coming from a more punitive, a more punishment perspective. Because when it is you come in and you see two girls, especially two darker skinned girls fighting, there are biases that are going to immediately kick in, whether you acknowledge it or not, that you are going to assume a lot of things about why, how, what they have come to this position that you wouldn't automatically do if you see, let's say, two of our Venezuelan counterparts, or let's say two of our East Indian counterparts. You are not going to give them the kind of grace that you would have given to somebody who is not Black. And therefore, your response to them is going to be different than your response to the others. So I am resistant to make it a community impact, a community-wide problem or endemic to the community. And if it is endemic to the community, the question that we have to ask is, what are the stimuli that is applied to this community that is not applied to other communities? And we have to be very real about what those stimuli are and how it impacts the community.
Those are great questions, Daniel. Let me just acknowledge before we go to Mitima and Dr. Fergus that there is definitely a difference in visibility between schools in certain communities and other schools. We know for a fact that some of these schools that are considered prestige schools do have issues of violence among their students as well. But for whatever reason, they very rarely make it into the public domain. So let me acknowledge that, and then we will go now to Brother Mitima, and then to you, Dr. Fergus, on this question.
I well said, Daniel. I worked Silver for 15 years and had the opportunity of working Spree Simon, and I saw the indiscipline among some of the students of a particular demographic. I worked Beetham Gardens, same thing. And then I went to El Socorro to work in Suffolk. And was a different demographic of children misbehaving compared to what I saw on the Beetham and Spree Simon, which is John John. Then I went to Shogunas. So, and I agree with Daniel in terms of we are more policed. I have an experience at Spree Simon. There was a Muslim student, and I was so hard on her for her misbehavior, for as I might say, her haram behavior. And a senior instructor told me, say, Mitima, that is an adolescent child behaving how any other adolescent child would behave. He said, your problem is, in your mind, she disrespecting your religion. So you're coming down hard on her, then you will come down on the other adolescent child with the same behavior. And I said, yeah, boy, that makes sense. Right? And so that I agree with Danielle when she said, we are police more, right? Because, hello, I've seen indiscipline with Indian children. If you have a Chinese child in Suffolk, it's across the board. But yes, as you said, Shabaka, we are more visible, right? We are more visible in terms of who looking also, eh? Who looking? Shabaka, you're mute, Shabaka, you're mute.
Let me just be clear, Mitima. I'm not saying that to in any way excuse our own misconduct or to try to diminish the misconduct that's coming from our community.
No,
I just want to make it very clear that I have my own personal experience with these matters, and I'm very closely aware that what makes it to the media is not a full reflection of what is actually taking place in the society. Dr. Fergus, let's bring the question now to you. This question of the place of African girls and women, in this conversation on school violence.
Yeah, well, that's a fact. I think it's a well-recognized fact that in terms of prejudice, particularly racial prejudice, but we can combine with class prejudice. When it comes to racial prejudice, right, Black people are the worst affected, and within that Black demographic, women are even, worse affected than men. So yes, I agree with that we have to consider that racial element, but we have to consider the class element, and even the religious element might also kick into the picture. Remember, we are in a cosmopolitan society, and all these things affect the reactions of state authorities and other authorities to deviance and other kinds of misdemeanors. But I just want to mention one thing, because we are approaching closing time. Not necessarily a question, but I wonder if what might be playing out in some respects is not a sort of consciousness by the most oppressed group of people in the Caribbean, the Africans, consciousness of multiple injustices that they are reacting to impulsively or reflectively, and therefore demonstrating an inability to display restraint, which might lead back to socialization. Could that be part of the dynamic playing out there, that if you repress, your emotions, you cannot find solutions or even understanding to the problems that are affecting you? And we do talk about generational trauma and all these things. We mention those words and we don't try to understand how they impact, day-to-day behaviors, particularly in situations like this. That you explode. Is it that you're really violent, or that, is something subliminal that is driving you into some kind of action that you yourself probably don't even understand. Perhaps Ntima might be able to explain some of that for us from his observations.
Well,
those are just some wild thoughts of mine, but you can comment on them.
Well, brother, before Brother Ntima comes in, let me just make the point that we live in a part of the world where the long-standing historical violence, that has played out here has not yet been properly acknowledged. So we are and once you do not acknowledge your violent past, you cannot address it in any way. So I'm not surprised that and when you look at the general crime statistics that we have in the region and the crime, homicides per capita and so on, where we fit in to the global picture, the absurdly high murder statistics that we have per capita, in relation to the rest of the world, it is not surprising that we are a society that has not yet adequately acknowledged our own violent past and really done enough to address the legacy of that past in the society. Let me just quickly, as we come into the close here, we have Yoruba woman suggesting that women have always had a warrior spirit. However, what has happened now is that the warrior spirit is being misdirected and misused. And Nigel Collins has just written that anti-blackness is so rampant across TNT, even within the black community, that serious intervention is needed. So we have two comments from the floor. Brother Ntima, you, and then Sister Danielle.
Well, I want to go back to what Danielle had said earlier in terms of our society and violence. And when she was speaking, my mind ran on not attacking the individual, but one of our social media influencers. Some of his skits now are about violence between two neighbors, and we create humor and comedy, right, over violence, and my wife will know that I do not like, I don't find it funny, jokes about domestic violence. And we have some comedians who will go on a stage and talk about how they beat their wife and big slap and kick, and the audience will laugh, and so we have to pay attention to these subliminal messages that subliminal, no, that we send to these young people, and then when they want to fight with cutlass and belt and this and that, then we frown on them. But we really have to pay attention to how we deal with violence within the society itself, because violence cannot be humorous, right? Be it on a social media skit or on a stand-up comedy stage. It cannot be humorous.
Yeah, well, Brother Ntima is already moving to a kind of the approach that we should take to these issues. The seriousness. I think he's trying to impress upon us the seriousness that we have to approach these issues with. But of course, we're still talking about the depth and profundity of the issue. Danielle, you have your closing remarks now. We're coming down to the end of the program.
Okay, so I want to address what Dr. Fergus said and then Ntima said. I do agree with Dr. Fergus that we do have and we are playing out what our history and our contemporary faces. It's putting us into the stimulus that we were put into that brought us here and continues to maintain us without addressing it. And I think one of the things that we could do to begin to address it is we can have more state-sponsored spaces where these conversations are happening more and more within the community. So we can address not only the historical violence, but we could also get the input of the man on the ground who is most impacted by this violence and other things to put in their $2 in how we could fix it and how we could address it, because they have very good solutions to the problems that they are exposed to on a daily basis. In terms of Brother Intima, I am very wary of editing or censoring art. I do agree with you that violence should never be funny, but I don't think that the way to go is to censor art, because art is usually a reflection of what our society holds either dear or sacrosanct and that type of thing. So I think we could use the art and what people find funny or engage in as a barometer of where we are at this point. And if it is, we use that as a barometer, we know we have a lot of work to do. And we can use that same art and use it as a teaching tool and a teaching technique for both our children and our parents, because I think parents, part of what we need to do to prepare parents for being parents in the regional authorities is to do some parenting classes in terms of the social elements of it and include some of these things. Why are these things wrong? What's the problem? What do you see? And you start to collect an idea of how people see themselves and how they see the ways that they could change, just as you did with the children. Let's begin to do that with the adults by creating these spaces where these adults could have these conversations and the conversations could manifest into programs and solutions.
Thank you, Danielle. Dr. Fergus, you want to guide us?
Well, I wouldn't want to add to that except to say that we have to move beyond talk to more systematic action, because we can keep talking forever. I know some of you, Danielle and Timo, you are doing your bit, but as I think we all agree this evening, there must be some governmental support, and that support must be institutionalized so that it would be sustained and survive transitions of government. Because if it is not institutionalized, then it means that when governments change, programs might come to an end, and then you're back to square one. So we have to fight for that. And somebody, I think earlier in the program, talked about advocacy. Perhaps that's one of the strategies to develop, that the voices need to be made more public and compel the authorities to listen. So that's my final thoughts for this evening.
Yes. And of course, I support Dr. Fergus 100% in the notion of action, but I do not, I don't want us to diminish the importance of the dialogue, because the action, well-intentioned action that is not based in a proper understanding of the reality of the situation may not really advance our cause. So we need to continue to have these conversations where we can deepen our understanding of the issues with people like Dr. Fergus, who have a historical background, with sociologists and others who have studied these issues carefully. One of the things we're going to do for future programs is we're going to study the reports on school violence, at least from the Caribbean Freedom Project. We intend to go through the reports very carefully to see what we could glean to decide how we will intervene in these issues going forward. So we will share that information with the public as we analyze these reports to see what is in there that could be of value for us, or maybe has been overlooked, maybe hasn't been looked at carefully enough, based and of course including the conversations we've had here on Indaba in those issues. So, Brother Mitima, Sister Danielle, I want to thank you for joining us tonight here on Indaba. I want to thank all our listeners, those who've shared their comments on social media, those who joined us on 91.1, and of course those who are going to tune in tomorrow and watch this program at home via the ESC's YouTube channel or whatever other media they choose to utilize. Enjoy Indaba, and join us again next week, Wednesday, for another edition of this program, the place where knowledge grows, the place to find consensus, the voice of the people, the voice of the Emancipation Support Committee. And don't forget, this weekend, Drum Festival on Saturday, launch of the Kwame Ture Memorial Lecture Series on Sunday. Good night.
Good night.